Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Osteoporosis Canada's Cook Along virtual cooking class. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your Cook Along host. Thank you to the Winnipeg Foundation and Canola Eat Well for their partnership in this Cook Along series. We are also live streaming this webinar on our Osteoporosis Canada Facebook page, so a big welcome to everyone watching on Facebook Live. This webinar will provide general information about cooking and food knowledge. It is not intended as individualized health or nutrition advice. If you have questions about nutrition, consult a physician or registered dietitian. Before we begin the cook along, here's some information on nutrition, which plays an important role in overall bone health and in preventing and managing osteoporosis. In people who have healthy bones, adequate calcium intake on a daily basis is necessary to maintain bone health. Vitamin D helps to increase the absorption of calcium, ultimately building stronger bones. Fats and oils in moderation, like canola oil, aid in the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D. Protein is also essential to bone health and is necessary to build and repair bone tissue. This week, the Cook Along is featuring a vegetarian recipe. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, it's important to get the calcium and protein you need in food sources such as calcium-fortified beverages, legumes, and vegetables like bok choy and broccoli. Speak to your family physician or registered dietitian if you need assistance in choosing foods for you. If it is not possible for you to get enough calcium through diet alone, a supplement may be helpful, but speak with your doctor prior to taking any supplements. Did you know not all food sources that list calcium as a nutrient are absorbed by the body? The calcium in some foods, such as sesame seeds, rhubarb, Swiss chard, and spinach, are not well absorbed because of their very high oxalate content, which binds the calcium. These foods have other nutrients, but are not a good source of calcium for bone health. Use the calcium calculator on Osteoporosis Canada's website to help you calculate your calcium from the foods you eat. Let's get cooking. Today's featured recipe is feta and kale stuffed mushrooms with 225 milligrams of calcium and 12 grams of protein per serving. You can find today's featured recipe and other recipes by visiting osteoporosis.ca/recipes. It's my pleasure to welcome Emily Richards, professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and cookbook author, who also enjoys culinary instruction for home cooks who want to learn more and have fun in the kitchen. She is the author and co-author of 9 cookbooks, which include topics from Italian cuisine, weeknight dinners, glycemic index diets, and comfort foods. Emily writes and develops recipes for cookbooks, print and online publications, and websites that include everyday cooking and healthy eating. Please welcome Emily.
Hey, everybody. So glad you guys could join me again this week. Last week, we had a great cook along, and this week is going to be another great one. And this is actually one of my favorite recipes. It's a great vegetarian recipe, as Tracie mentioned, and it's super easy to make, and it's got a make ahead, which I love make aheads. I don't know about you guys, but I love when I can do stuff ahead of time. And this one is fabulous because we are going to do everything together. The recipe is very simple. We're using great ingredients. Thanks to, shout out to DeLucas for getting us these wonderful ingredients. But we are going to do it together because I think in the time, at least this is my thought process, is that we can actually do everything together. So it's perfect. We're going to start off with the mushrooms. These are kale and feta stuffed mushrooms. And the mushrooms that we're using are portobellos. And they actually come in various sizes. So you guys all got probably different sizes. The recipe actually calls for 10 portobello mushrooms, about 4 inches in diameter. So when you take a look at them, if you have your ruler in the kitchen, you can measure them. But I know some of you got double the size of 4 inches. So you got less mushrooms. They look beautiful. So that's perfect right now for us to use. So in the recipe, it calls for 10. We cut up 4 and use 6. So for those of you that got 6 really big mushrooms, you're going to cook 4 and still cut up 2. And those of you that vary anywhere between 7 and 8, you can cook 4 or 5 and we'll chop 2 or 3, okay? Now, we're gonna do this together. I haven't done any of my mushrooms. The first thing we're gonna do is take off the stems, but don't get rid of them because we're gonna chop these up. So I'm gonna take out all my stems and you'll notice that they're different sizes, okay? Some are really short and some are a bit longer. So we're just gonna pop them out just like that.
Emily, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So
Of
I have
course.
a mix of big and large. What do you recommend that I'm going to be doing? Like, which 4 should I keep? The big ones or should I keep the smaller ones?
I would keep the 4 that are of most similar size. So whether they're 4 bigger ones or 4 smaller ones, just so that when you put them in the oven, they'll all cook the same. And that goes for everybody else as well. Pick your 4 or 5 that look about the same size, because those are going to go into the oven and the rest will be chopping, okay? But for the first part, we need to take all the stems out because the mushrooms, we're going to do a little bit of cleaning for them, okay? Now on the outside, I usually just give them a little bit of a wipe. So you can use a damp cloth or just a paper towel, okay? That will work too. So I'm going to put my stems off to one side here because we're going to come back to them. I'm going to move my onions and garlic. I know it looks like a lot of mushrooms, but trust me, as we all know, mushrooms are pretty much water. So when they cook down to not much. All right. So I have my pile of mushrooms and I'm going to bring over this bowl because I need to catch the gills. So inside of our mushroom here, there are these brown gills. One of the bonuses of a portobello mushroom, which is a brown button mushroom that gets to grow about 3 or 4 extra days. And that's what opens up the cap. So visibly, you can see all those brown gills. What we're going to do is take just a little spoon and scrape them out, okay? And I actually do this every time I use portobello mushrooms. You don't have to be too rough with it. They'll just slide right out just like that, okay? And then you're going to do that to all your mushrooms. I do this anytime I cook portobellos because I find it gives it a nice, cleaner flavor of the mushroom, and it also doesn't make them so dark, okay? So the reason being is if you've ever grilled or roasted portobello mushrooms, they tend to look really dark, and that's just because of the gills inside. Now, the older the mushrooms are, you'll notice that the gills may not be quite as firm. They might be a little bit slimy for the technical term. So this is a great way to kind of boost up the flavor of the mushroom itself by getting rid of the gills. Now, if you were in a rush, you don't have to do this, but I really do enjoy it. And it also gives us that nice little cup shape in there, okay? It gives us a really nice opening to put our filling in. And you can do this with stuffing mushrooms as well. So stuffing mushrooms are usually white button mushrooms that, again, are a little bit larger, and they're great to put fillings in. You don't have to take the gills out because they typically are not quite as dark. So I have 3 more left to scrape out here. And by all means, if you have any questions as we're going along, please send the questions. Happy to answer them about mushrooms, what we're doing tonight, or any other vegetarian dish you might be cooking at home. All right. So what do you do with these gills? They're going to the compost. So I'm going to set those aside. You can very easily saute them up. If you were making a really nice mushroom sauce, they're going to add a lot more flavor. So you could do that, which is absolutely delicious. But what we're going to do is have our parchment paper on our baking sheet, okay? And if you don't want to use parchment paper, that's totally fine. You could use foil, or you could just brush lightly some canola oil onto the baking sheet because we just don't want the mushrooms to stick, okay? And so I'm going to just set this aside here, and I'm going to set aside my 6 mushrooms that are about the same size because I have 4-inch mushrooms. So I'm just going to use these 2. Look nice. And I could say you could use the prettiest mushrooms, but in the end, they'll all look the same when they're done. So I'm just spacing them out, and they're going cap side, open side up, okay? Now, if I'm going too fast for anyone, let me know, because I can slow down. I don't want to, I'm gonna change my view here so I can see everybody busily working. And what we're gonna do is start chopping up our mushrooms, okay? So you can start with your stems, or you could start with the caps, whatever you feel comfortable with. Or for those of you that happen to have a food processor on your counter, I don't, because I don't have any room, you could pulse the mushrooms in your food processor to chop them up finely. Now, I say finely. If you don't feel like chopping them finely, you definitely don't have to, but they do need to be chopped fairly small so that when we go to cook them, they'll create that really nice texture. I love portobello mushrooms because they offer up a nice meaty texture. You'll see them often used in vegetarian cooking. I'm just going to put it right into my skillet, okay? Normally I would put this into a bowl, but I'm gonna go right to the skillet this time. So oftentimes you'll see it used in sauces to replace meat. In our case, we're using it as the shell for our filling, but I love them as burgers. They have lots of flavor, and the reason why they have flavor is the way you cook them. So it's always good to cook them so that the water does come out and the flavor builds, and they'll also get a nice little bit of caramelization on them. And the way we're cooking them tonight in the oven, they will also get the flavor absorbed right into the mushroom, because that's where the filling is going, okay? So I'm just chopping away here, and I'm going to go over how I'm holding my knife and how to chop with each vegetable that I chop. First one being mushrooms. So I have a good solid grip on the base of my, or the handle of my knife, okay? And I tend to grip up closer to the blade, okay? And it just, I feel like I have a firmer grip. And then when I'm holding onto the mushroom, obviously it's flat side down, so it's not moving. And then I'm just rocking my knife to make nice slices all the way through. And I'm moving my knife, not the mushroom, okay? So the knife comes closer to my hand, and then I just give it a twist. I'm right-handed, so that's why I tend to twist it this way. It'll look completely the opposite if you're left-handed, okay? And then just keep chopping so you get those nice little pieces. And if you want it a little bit finer, you could go back and just give it another little chop, okay? And then I'm just gathering it up and putting it into my skillet. Now onto the stems. Same idea. I'm just going to slice them up. And I'll do probably all of them because I can get through them fairly quickly. Just like that. And then I'm going to go back and chop these up too. Now, oftentimes you'll see mushrooms are completely discarded from a recipe, but because these have a very similar texture to the mushroom cap itself, it's really beneficial to cook with them. I actually will sometimes reserve the portobello stems. If I just want the caps for something else, I'll keep these in the refrigerator and then just slice them up and saute them with some butter. They have a beautiful texture and they're wonderful with steak, okay? So don't ever get rid of those portobello mushroom stems. You paid for them, right? You want to use them. All right. And then I'm just going to group it all up together and give it a chop. And to me, this is one of the most relaxing parts of being in the kitchen is chopping. I know for some people, it's probably the worst thing ever, but if you have a really good chef's knife and it's sharp, it doesn't have to be a really good, it has to be sharp, most importantly. Whoops, I need that. Pop that back in so that I can hear anybody that has a question. Oh, I guess it doesn't want to stay in tonight. Hang on a sec. There we go. I'm just going to give my hands a wash. There we go. All right, it may pop out again. My ears might have grown, I'm not sure. All right, so I'm just chopping that all up here, and I'm gonna add this to my skillet as well. All right, so how's everybody doing for chopping? Have I given you enough stress about chopping mushrooms? I hope not. It's not supposed to be stressful at all. Now, if you're not comfortable using a larger chef's knife when you're cutting mushrooms, by all means, you could use a smaller knife. A lot of people like to use paring knives. Whatever you feel comfortable with. and that will make your prep in the kitchen happen a little bit faster, okay? So I'm gonna give my knife a little wipe, and I'm also gonna wipe my cutting board just so that it's not too slippery. And we're gonna move on to our onion, which is one of my favorite vegetables to use. Why? Because it's a huge flavor builder, okay? We know mushrooms, as I said, not a ton of flavor, but we're gonna build the flavor. So by doing that, we're gonna add some onions and garlic. We're gonna use an onion, and I'm just using a regular cooking onion. In recipes, when it calls for 1 onion, typically it's about a medium-sized onion, which is, it fits into the palm of my hand. So I would say it's about 4 ounces if you were weighing your vegetables. If it's a little bit larger, no worries. If it's a red onion, that's okay too. If you didn't happen to have onions at home, you could use green onions, shallots, leeks are really delicious. You could have a lovely combination of flavors with any of those. So the first thing I'm gonna do is, my onion has a root end and a stem end, okay? So this is the part that has the lovely greens that would normally grow. So this is my stem end. I'm gonna just trim that off to expose the layers of the onion, okay? You can see it, this is a really fresh onion, so if I start to cry, you know why. And then I'm just gonna cut it in half. So I'm just putting my hands on either side and cutting right down the middle. And what this does, it just gives me that edge to peel off the outer layer, okay? Now, if you happen to love making soup stock, don't get rid of this, right? We don't want too much food waste around. So just keep this in a Ziploc bag in your freezer so that next time you go to make broth, you can just pull it out and throw it in, okay? So I'm gonna take those layers off and set that aside. Now I have, much like I used the flat side of the mushroom cap, I have 2 flat sides of the onion, okay? So let's start with 1/2. I'm gonna hold it so that I'm gonna cut lengthwise strips. So I'm not cutting all the way at the root end. I'm gonna leave that intact. And I'm just using the tip of my knife and making long cuts like this, okay? Now, they're fairly close together. That's gonna give me a smaller, almost like a dice of an onion. If I want it even in smaller pieces, what I'm gonna do is just flatten my hand up top and then just gently slice my knife along the middle, but again, not going all the way to the bottom, okay? So you can see I already have some lovely little pieces of onion. And now I just have to do that same motion that I did with the mushroom. I'm moving my knife. The closer I keep my knife every time I cut it, the smaller those onion pieces will be. And then that piece that I would have normally cut off, that root end, okay, is gonna go into my stockpile. And I'm gonna add that to my skillet. I'm trying to do minimal dishes tonight, so I'm getting everything into the skillet. Don't worry, if you're joining me in the weeks to come, there'll be lots of bowls. There'll be lots of mise en place. All right. So we're gonna do the same thing again. Those lengthwise cuts along the onion, just like that. So this gives you the option of doing a chop, a dice, a mince of an onion. Then again, just right across, and then doing those nice small cuts with your knife. Now, if my knife wasn't very sharp, it would be a little bit tricky for me to cut through like that. So this way, it's sliding through. I tend to sharpen my knives often so that I can work quickly, okay? And if you do find that your knives need to be sharpened, I would suggest finding someone in town that is a professional knife sharpener that works with good knives, okay? All right, now, next. I hope you're not tired of chopping yet because we have to do our garlic. And it's 4 cloves of garlic. And this is where garlic chopping goes all over the map. I already have my peeled garlic, okay? And time saver tip, you can always peel your garlic and just keep it in the fridge. Just keep it in an airtight container. If you know that you're going to be using garlic through the week, do about a head or 2 heads worth. You know how much garlic you use at home. And then just keep it in an airtight container. And then all you have to do is pull out peeled cloves of garlic to start whatever you're doing. Now, oftentimes what you'll do is you'll see chefs kind of take the side of their knife and just bash the garlic. And then it'll be kind of all squirted out on top of the cutting board. We don't want to do that because we don't want to lose all the garlic juice on our cutting board. We want to have all that flavor of the garlic in our filling. So we're basically going to treat the garlic clove like we did the onion, okay? And I'll also show you a different way in case you don't have the patience to do this. So I'm using my chef's knife again. You can switch to a paring knife if you want. You're going to make those long cuts again. And again, I'm trying to stay tight because this time I want to mince. I want it fairly small. Then I'm just going to flip this over and do a cut down the middle. And then I'm just going to do I'm going to stay really, really close and do some fine chopping. And then you can go back over it to mince. Now, some of you are probably thinking, why am I not using a garlic press? Well, I don't like using a garlic press for this type of thing, but if you want to use a garlic press, you go ahead. You could also use a microplane and grate it, okay? That gives you a really fine garlic. I tend to use a rasp or a garlic press when I'm putting garlic in my salad dressing so that it's really, really nice and fine. But as I said, I really do like chopping, so I tend to chop everything by hand. So the other way you could do the garlic is literally just by making these slices going all the way down, always using the flat side so you don't have anything moving around. So I have all these lovely slices of garlic. I'll do this one too. Okay. And then just bringing it all together and making it into a little pile. And then you can start maneuvering your knife so that you're working fast. This is always really impressive if you have people walking through your kitchen, because then they'll look at you and go, wow, she really knows what she's doing. There. And what you're basically doing is trying to get a smaller, finer mince. Okay, just like that. And then I'm just going to wipe off my knife and gather up the garlic and get it into the pan. Okay. Now I'm also going to take my knife to the sink with my sticky hands, because fresh garlic tends to be sticky, and your knife is going to be sticky. So I'm going to go to the sink and just under some cool water, I'm going to literally take my knife and rub my fingers blade side away from me and rub my fingertips along the blade. It does help remove some of the garlic smell. And if you don't want to do that, you can actually just rub your hands in your stainless steel sink, because that will work too, okay? But you have to clean your knife anyway, so why not clean your hands at the same time? And as a side note about knives, I don't put my knives in the dishwasher. I'll put like my kitchen knives, the ones that we eat with, in the dishwasher, but not my knives that I cut and chop with. It's that fast, so they don't need to go into the dishwasher. All right, next, let's start cooking. I feel like I've done too much talking and chopping and we're not cooking enough. So let's start cooking. And I'm just gonna switch my view here so that I can see you guys. Or maybe not. There we are. All right. Okay. So let's start cooking. What are we gonna cook with? We have all our, not all our vegetables yet, but we have our mushrooms, onions, and garlic in our skillet. We're gonna start off with some canola oil in there with it. Okay, so I'm gonna add my canola oil in here. We don't need too much. I am using a nonstick skillet. If you're not using a nonstick skillet, you can add a little bit more canola oil. That's totally okay. But here's one of the reasons why I'm using canola oil. I'm using canola oil because it's a neutral oil, and we're gonna build the flavor with those vegetables that we have. And we're gonna add more. So we really want those vegetables to shine. And the canola oil will do that because it's letting us build the flavor on its neutral back, okay? And we're cooking this over medium-high heat. So canola oil has a nice high smoke point, which means, sounds fancy, doesn't it? It means that I can cook at high temperatures. I actually use it a lot when I deep fry as well. So it doesn't transfer flavors because of the fact that it's a neutral oil. All right, so I'm gonna get my spatula, and we're gonna also be ready to stir. So I'm going to stir this up, and this is going to be cooking for a bit because as I mentioned, we're gonna cook out the water of the mushrooms and the onions and the garlic because they do have water in them, and we want to concentrate the flavor so they'll get a little bit sweeter and they'll pick up some golden brown color, okay? and it will also smell wonderful. So for those of you that don't have your oven on, great time to turn your oven on to 400. Mine always takes a little bit longer, so I always get my oven on first, and then I'm ready to go. We're gonna chop some more. 2 more things, I promise, and that's it. We're gonna use some baby kale, and I love using baby kale. It's a great way to add some greens, add some calcium, and add some texture. So baby kale is a little bit smaller and more tender than regular kale, but not to worry, if you can't find baby kale, you can use regular kale. The only thing that you need to do is remove that really tough stem in the regular kale, curly kale. I'm going to hold this leaf up to this camera just so I can show you how tender this little stem is for the baby kale. Okay, so this, if you were looking at a full-size kale leaf, would be very, very thick and fibrous. Again, something that you can pull off and put it in your stock pot. It does offer up a fairly strong taste when you put it in your stock pot, or you could use it as a base of roasting a pork roast or beef roast, just to kind of lift it up out of the liquid that it's cooking in. So it does have some great versatility. But in our case, we're going to use baby kale. What if you don't like baby kale? What are you going to use? Swiss chard would be a great option here. I actually still have some in my garden that I really need to take out. Red Swiss chard, rainbow Swiss chard, regular Swiss chard, any of it will work. And you can use both the stalks and the leaves. Okay, so if you want, you could replace, we're using 6 cups, but we are going to chop it a little bit just so that we don't have big, long pieces of the kale. And I know this may sound funny that it'd be big and long, but once this cooks down, it would actually be about this long. And then that's what's going to be hanging out of your mouth when you cut into the mushrooms. All right, so I'm going to put this all on my cutting board. And I tend to cut greens very similarly to how I would cut fresh herbs. So if it's easier for you, because this is quite a bit of greens, you can break it up into 2 and just kind of bunch it up all together. And this doesn't have to be finely chopped. We're going to do kind of a coarse chop here. And literally just, I'm doing about 1-inch slices like that. Okay, there's my, and I'll put this back in my measuring cup here so that I can clear the cutting board. And then I'm going to squish up my other bunch, the rest of the kale, and slice it up, just like so. Okay, so you don't have to be exact with this. If I was making a pasta dish, I would do the same with the kale. Just give it a nice rough chop. It's a better way to I can't even talk. It's a better distribution of the green to coat more of the pasta when you're doing that, okay? And don't forget to stir your mushrooms. Now, I also need to season this. We're going to add some salt to this. Nice and simple. I'm just using a little bit of salt. I'm not going overboard with salt because we are adding feta to the dish as well. Now, if you want, you can taste your feta, okay? Have a little nibble and see how salty it is. If it's really, really salty, you could give it a rinse. If it's not too salty, you're okay. You can also, if you're using a saltier feta, hold back on some of the salt, okay? I tasted my feta, it's not too salty. And I did actually give it a rinse too, just in case. There we are. So I hope your kitchen is smelling as wonderful as mine. I love cooking mushrooms, especially with onions and garlic. I'll just tip that a little bit. You can see that it's cooking down nicely. And mushrooms are one of those, just like greens, when you put them in your skillet, they start out in a big pile and then they just cook down. And that's really how you build the flavor. This is actually a wonderful appetizer too. So if you wanted to change things up a bit, I love serving it as a vegetarian main course, but you can definitely serve this up as an appetizer on a bed of greens. So you can bulk up the greens a little bit. You don't have to use kale, but you can use something like a spring mix or anything like that. That would be absolutely delicious.
Hey, Emily.
Yes.
Question. I think I heard you say you rinsed your feta. Did I hear you say that?
Yes, you did hear me say that. I did rinse the
Can
feta.
you, yeah, so is that something you would often do, or do you taste first, or can you tell us more?
Yeah, for sure. I always taste my feta. And the great thing about tasting feta is that you get to taste it. And then you're tasting it for saltiness. And there's also different styles of feta that you can purchase. So you can get a goat's feta, a goat's milk feta, a sheep's milk feta, a cow's milk feta, a combination of milk feta. Some are imported and some are made here in Canada, and they're delicious. So they all vary slightly, and they're also different in texture. So if you taste them, that gives you the ability to find out what is your favorite. And then you will always continue to buy that one, because it's very, very rare that they will kind of change the formula. So I have a lot of friends that aren't fans of sheep's milk or goat's milk. So I often will purchase cow's milk feta, and then I can always assure them that it's cow's milk feta so that they'll eat what I'm making. So if you know that about your family or whoever you're serving these to, you can plan accordingly and get that. So giving it a rinse, you have to purchase it. I have a nice little chunk here that I saved to show everybody. It's a thin chunk. Sometimes you'll get it in a bigger chunk. And all I do is take it to the sink and run it under some cold water. Okay. Because the cheese is typically packed in a brine, which is a salty water solution, and that's to help preserve it, it tends to be a little bit salty. And then what I do to, if it's in a container with the brine, I'll drain the brine, and then I will add water to it to store any of the feta, just because I know that I'll be using it up fairly quickly, and I don't need it to be stored in that brine again. So hopefully that helps.
Emily, my mushrooms look done.
They look done? Okay, that's okay. So take them off the heat if they're done.
Okay.
And then I will join you in a minute because mine are almost done too. Okay. So if your mushrooms are looking done, that's great. Just turn off your heat because we do have to add more to the skillet. And I talk too much. But my mushrooms aren't quite there yet. And that's probably because I didn't chop them as finely as maybe some of you did. I was kind of feeding through them. All right, now I'm going to add this lovely kale. So you're looking for the mushrooms to have a nice golden color to them. Okay, so you can see they have that nice little bit of brown. And with portobello mushrooms, you won't see so much evaporation. So with smaller button mushrooms, often you'll see water come out of them. With portobellos, they're a little bit of a drier, meatier mushroom, so you won't see that happen. So that's where we're relying on that golden brown color to come through so that we can know that we can continue with the recipe, okay? So I'm gonna add my kale. That's gonna go in there, just like so. And then we're gonna chop our dill, our fresh dill. This is my beautiful dill here that I'm gonna chop up. We need 3 tablespoons, okay? And how much is 3 tablespoons from a bunch of dill sprigs? I don't know, just chop. If you chop a little extra, that's okay. It'll taste that much better. I'm a big believer of using more fresh herbs if you have them, because you don't want them to sit in your crisper and not get used, okay? If you're not a dill fan, you could use other fresh herbs like basil. Parsley is one of my go-tos that I always have. That's gonna go in with our kale. And if you were making this again and you didn't have fresh dill, or you didn't wanna buy fresh dill, you can use a couple teaspoons of dried dill, okay? Because that will give you the same flavor. And I would add it a little bit earlier in the recipe. I would add it when I'm cooking the onions and the mushrooms, just so that it has the opportunity to soften a little bit more than when I'm using fresh. I tend to add it closer to the end, okay? So what we're looking to do here is wilt our kale, and you should have that lovely fresh aroma of dill with your mushrooms. Okay, I'll bring it over to this camera so that you can see how everything's coming along. Okay, everything's nice and wilted. Now, if you wanted to, you could double up on these greens, because as you can see, it's a nice balance between mushroom and kale. But if you love your greens, by all means, you can definitely add some more. Okay. Let's see where we're at here. How's everybody doing? I see lots of stirring happening, so that's good. I see a nice pan from Ellen. She's stirring. And how's it looking? All right. So now, with everything wilted, I'm going to turn off my heat. I'm going to bring it down to the cutting board here, because this is when we get to add our feta. Okay.
Look at mine, Emily. It's looking really great.
Okay, I have to change this view. It keeps popping away from me.
Emily, we go, like, could you go past wilted? Like, is there too far? Will it be okay?
There is past wilted, and it usually starts to crisp up and get a little bit golden brown. And that is what I love about greens. I actually like when they caramelize a little bit more and get a little almost crunchy. They're so delicious. And plus, because we're adding the feta in there, they will soften up a little bit again. But too wilted is essentially if they've gone too dry. So that's kind of going over the top, if you will. Okay. And we're going to put our feta right into our skillet. Now, I did a rough crumble of mine, so I'm just going to crumble it in a little bit more. And the bonus here being is that if you wanted to, you could replace the feta with one of your other favorite cheeses. You could use ricotta cheese, would make these much creamier, and you could literally stir it in. You could also use an herbed cream cheese, which would make it a little bit smoother as well. Or you could use a combination of feta and maybe some cheddar if you like. Okay. And we're adding a cup because that's really what kind of keeps everything together and gives us a really, really nice boost of flavor and calcium, which is fabulous for us tonight. I'm going to add just this little extra piece that I had left out too, because I absolutely love this feta. Now to this mixture, we're also going to add some seasoned breadcrumbs. Now, if you happen to have a family member with a gluten allergy, you can use gluten-free seasoned breadcrumbs, or you can leave this out. But the bonus here with the seasoned breadcrumbs, we only need about 1/3 cup. It's going to help kind of bring everything together. And it's actually also going to add a little bit more seasoning because the seasoned breadcrumbs have some seasoning in them as well. And one of the bonuses, we're getting an extra little bit of cheese because that's typically one of the ingredients in our seasoned breadcrumbs. All right, I'm going to add the rest of that. Now, I will let you know that if you wanted to change this up a bit, you could toss this with a hot, freshly boiled spaghetti, drizzle it with a little bit more canola oil, and toss this all together. It makes an absolutely delicious pasta dish. Okay, so don't feel like you have one recipe here. You have a recipe that has versatility to be changed into whatever you want. Okay, and the reason why you would use that canola oil there is to help coat and just thin out this mixture a little bit more so that it coats the pasta really, really well. All right, so in come our lovely portobello mushroom caps. Once our filling is nicely stirred together, I'm gonna scooch it over a bit and grab myself a spoon to do some filling here. And what we're going to do is take our filling and just kind of mound it up. Try to be as even as you can as you divide them. Okay. And again, it does vary based on the size of the mushrooms. And then as this cooks, what ends up happening is that we get that lovely mushroom cap kind of bakes around and softens around the filling. Now, I have been known to take this stuffed mushroom, the next day and tuck it into a pita or a Kaiser bun and eat it as a sandwich. It's so yummy. I like to toast it a little bit first. There. So I have my mushroom caps filled to the gills, if you will. That was a bad joke. All right, I'm gonna give my hands a rinse, and then these are gonna go into the oven till they're done. Wow, everybody's mushrooms look great. The mushrooms that I can see look awesome. I'm gonna pop this into the oven because my oven is good and hot, just like so. Now, normally I would say to you, oh, wow, look at those mushrooms, you guys, they look awesome. I love seeing everybody's mushrooms. This is great. I'm gonna change my view here so that I can see. Ah, I see some finger licking. That's
Those are
great.
mine.
That means it must be good. Those look fabulous. I love it. Now, if you happen to have some fresh dill still kicking around, if you didn't use it all, you can sprinkle some more on top, or you can save it for garnishing later. How are yours doing, Dawn? Oh, they look great. Wow, you guys really did get huge mushroom caps. They're so big. they're like steaks. They're so big. So this is normally the point where I would say, and here's the finished ones, but guess what? I didn't have time to make any ahead. So they're in the oven, just like yours. I don't have any finished ones, but they pretty much look the same as them going in, except they're a little bit softer. So you do want to keep an eye on them. They're going to take anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes to cook. And that's really just to tenderize, like get the portobello mushroom cap a little bit more tender. And just so that it's easier to kind of cut through and break through. Now, the one thing we didn't do is we didn't season the mushroom caps themselves, and that's okay, because we have so much seasoning in the filling that's gonna sit and give the mushroom cap a lot of flavor. If you wanted to, you could easily drizzle them with a little bit more canola oil and sprinkle them with salt and pepper before putting them in. We didn't add any pepper, but by all means, you're welcome to add pepper the next time you make them. Or if you want to kick up the heat a little bit, you could actually add some hot pepper flakes right to the mushroom, onion, and garlic mixture and cook it in so that it really adds a nice kind of spicy note. It works really well with all the flavors that we're using, which who doesn't like a little heat? Well, maybe the kids don't, but you could enjoy it. Are there any questions from anybody? I feel like we did so much work. And everybody's just relaxing because their mushrooms are in the oven now.
Hi, Emily. Oh, I do have a question from somebody, from one of our viewers who's not cooking along today, but instead of the seasoned breadcrumbs, could they use like chickpea flour or rice flour or semolina? Is any of that an opportunity in this recipe?
That's a great question. And it's not a complete necessity. So I wouldn't go with any of the flours because that would make it just a little too pasty. But I would use something like a cornmeal, and that would add just a little bit of crunch. I wouldn't use a third cup. I'd use about a quarter cup and then just stir it in. And that'll help keep it together a little bit more than not using any at all. And again, by all means, you don't need the breadcrumbs in there. I'm using them doubly for seasoning as well as just a little bit of a binder. The other thing that you can do to bump up the protein here and still keep it vegetarian is if you didn't want to use the breadcrumbs, you could also add an egg and just beat it lightly and stir it in and then pack it in. So that will give you a firmer filling, but that will also bump up the protein a little bit too. And if you wanted to, this is going the next level. If you have leftovers and you want to heat it up, it's a great breakfast idea. So you can just warm it up and then serve it with a fried egg on top or a poached egg and just cut into it, and it's absolutely delicious. And then you bump up that 12 grams of protein easily just by adding an egg. And it makes it a wonderful start to your day because you're getting your veggies, your protein, and your dairy, and you're ready to go. I think it's a good start to Thursday tomorrow, maybe for everybody.
That sounds great. We have time for one more question. And do any of the cook along folks have any questions for their cooking class? It all looked amazing. If not, the question we have is, could you use chopped nuts instead of breadcrumbs?
Another great idea. Do they want to replace anything with the nuts or just add the nuts?
Well, it just actually asked if they could use coarsely chopped walnuts, if that would work.
It would totally work.
I had a quick question.
Yeah, for sure, Dawn.
I noticed on the recipe, it actually talked about putting them in the refrigerator and like prepping in advance. Yeah. So do you have to warm them up to room temperature before you pop them in the oven, or can you talk about that a bit?
Yes, definitely. The make ahead, this has a great make ahead. You can actually fill them to the point before they go into the oven. Make sure you wrap your baking sheet well or store them in an airtight container, and you can leave them in the fridge overnight, even up to 2 days, to be honest with you, just between me and you, and keep them chilled. There's nothing in there that will damage the mushroom at all. If you do add an egg though, just one night in the fridge. And then all you have to do is pull them out, put them on your baking sheet and bake them. They may take just a couple minutes longer because they're cold. I always, as a recommendation, have all my ingredients for my recipes out at room temperature so that they can come together really quickly and easily, and they go into the oven at room temperature. So when they have that bit of a chill from the refrigerator, it does take a little bit of extra time, but literally within a minute or two, they'll heat up enough to then continue with baking at the regular time. Now, for those of us that are joining us that have a fancy new oven, it may take even less time. So if you're using a convection on your oven, for those of you that have a convection oven, it will take less time as well. So you may want to start checking it at around the 12 to 15 minute mark. And what you're looking for is that nice tender mushroom, and it has a nice golden hue. You'll get the golden color on your feta, and that's how you know. It'll kind of melt a little bit. I love feta because it doesn't melt completely. Now to the walnut question, you can definitely add walnuts. I would even add up to a half a cup into the filling. And then if you really want to marry the walnuts beautifully, they're great with feta, but what about blue cheese? That would be a delicious combination in here. I wouldn't use a cup of blue cheese because it'd be quite strong, maybe 3/4 of a cup or even half a cup. But with the combination with walnuts and blue cheese, you have a winning appetizer, guaranteed.
So I have the behemoth mushrooms.
Yes.
I could feed an army with these behemoths. So like, will they wilt down at all, or are they just going to stay pretty much in their own shape?
They will retain mostly their shape, but they will wilt because of the water that's in them. And as they're cooking, that water will evaporate out and get a little bit smaller, and it'll hug the filling a little bit. So, and the other bonus being is if you can't finish all the behemoth mushrooms, you can eat them for tomorrow or the next day. They will refrigerate beautifully in the fridge for a couple of days. So you can incorporate them as a side dish or serve them on top of a salad. Or as I said, for breakfast, they would be great.
I love the breakfast idea. That's a really great idea.
But you have to try it in the sandwich too.
Yeah.
Great in a sandwich.
Yeah.
It's like having a hamburger patty, just the portobello mushroom version.
Well, I've eaten it in restaurants, portobello mushroom burgers, but I've never made them. So this is my whole...
This is a perfect opportunity to try, because you may have leftovers with the size of your mushrooms.
Well, this sounds great. Emily, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Emily, do you have any last comments that you want to provide?
Last comments. Well, I hope that everyone tries this recipe and makes it a few times and add your own variations to bump up the protein, bump up the calcium, and keep your bones strong. Eating these types of foods will definitely do that, and they taste delicious too.
That's awesome. All
Thanks,
right. Well,
Emily,
Emily,
that was fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Emily. And thank everyone who registered to cook along. You guys did an amazing job. And for more information on how to calculate your calcium, to get today's recipe, because many of you are asking for that, and for more information on nutrition for bone health, visit our website, osteoporosis.ca. And specifically for the recipe, if you visit osteoporosis.ca/recipes. You can also view the recorded version of this webinar on the OC replay webpage, which will be available online in the next 48 hours. Thank you again to our partners, the Winnipeg Foundation and Cannoli Eat Well, for their partnership, and to our presenter, Emily Richards, and DeLuca's in Winnipeg for their grocery delivery for helping us get this off and running. And we're so excited because we have 2 more cook-along classes. So if you live in Winnipeg, you can register for either one or for both of the 2 remaining classes. If you don't live in Winnipeg or just want to watch and learn, you can also register to watch the upcoming webinars at osteoporosis.ca/cookalong. Thank you to our great group of participants and to everyone watching on Facebook Live. Be sure to stay connected by following Osteoporosis Canada on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, everyone, and have a great dinner. Bye. See you next week.